Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan from startups.com, joined by Will Schroeder, my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com. Will, startups are all about growing as fast and as furiously as possible, right?
They are not. They're all about crashing as fast and furiously as possible if we don't
Uh,
actually know where we're supposed to be spending our time and, more importantly, our money. And I think
right.
today we can kind of dispel this myth of let's build everything fast and actually build a case for growing slowly. And I know
Yeah.
it's going to sound heretical. Like people are going to be like, what? This is absurd.
Yeah.
But I think if we unpack it enough, people are gonna be like, you know what? That kind of makes sense. Like, even if I'm planning on building this, next Facebook, there probably is a pace at which I should be going in order to make good decisions. And I think
Yes.
at its core, we should be talking about growing at a pace that allows us to make good decisions. All right, so before we get into this next topic, I just want to let you know what we talk about here is like 1% of the conversation. Really, this conversation is going on all day long online at groups.startups.com, where Ryan and I pretty much talk endlessly with founders about every one of these topics. So if by the end of this discussion you like the topic and you want to dig into it a little bit more with Ryan and I, just head to groups.startups.com and we'll pick it up from there.
Yeah. Pace is a word that you're going to hear a whole lot today. So if that triggers you, probably skip to the next episode. Yeah, because that's today's episode, all about pace and all about how it impacts several different aspects of the business. Well, what do you think is let's start first with like, why do we feel like we have to grow them so fast? Because I think let's start with that inner drive that says we have to do this, so that we start from that emotional center point of like why it is that we feel this way in the first place, and then try to find the end of that thread and unravel it from there.
I think we're excited. We're optimistic. We haven't
Yeah.
broken anything yet, right? And so at this point, right?
Yes.
We're the
Yep.
kid on the playground that's just running to every single jungle gym piece and being like, "Oh my god, what could possibly happen if I
My
fall off of
God.
here?"
That
And
is Jack right now. Yes.
it's both of our boys, and it's this magical moment. It's great in a lot of ways, but it's dangerous as hell, right? No different than our boys, right? I
Yes.
think at the early stages where we haven't burned ourselves yet, where we haven't
Right.
fallen off, the metaphorical jungle gym yet, we think we've got this idea. A couple people said they want to buy it. It must be proven. Now all we have to do is just kind of add gas to it, and that's where we kill ourselves.
Right. Only good things have happened. And they're not very big good things,
Right.
but like nothing's gone wrong yet. And a couple of good things have happened. And so, of course, we go back and we change our financial projections to show that those things will continue to just go
Course.
on forever and ever and ever and grow without very much effort. All we have to do is just do more of it and do it faster, right?
Well, we don't know any better. That's the problem.
Yep.
If it's our first startup, typically, we're looking at this is all we know. This is all the data we have. We told 5 people.
Yeah.
They said it was awesome, right? We ran some Google ads against our landing page, and people said good things. We put it on a couple social sites, and people said good things. This must mean something, right? So let's
Right.
hit the gas. And I think that's
Yes.
part of it. I think the other part of it that kind of throws us is we have this general narrative within the startup world that startups grow big and fast. And so it's venture
Yes.
capital acceleration. It's this idea that we're going to hire a ton of people and get big, et cetera. And there's a time and a place for that. Don't get me wrong.
Yes, for
This
sure.
isn't anti-growth or anti-speed. It's anti-growth, anti-speed before you figured out exactly what you should be growing. And guess what?
Right.
It takes a minute. It takes a lot
Right.
of minutes, and people
It
tend to
does.
get that.
Now, yeah, if you've seen the, they ship all the new cars now completely wrapped in plastic, right? Like
Yep.
they've got this protective covering over all of them. It's analogous to jumping in the car, turning it on, figuring out how to put it in gear, and going, "Hey, everything's going really well so far." But before peeling the sticker off the windshield, stomping on the accelerator, right? You don't yet know what you don't know, and you're not quite sure where you're headed yet, but you're about to start to go really fast.
Well,
This is where the danger ensues. And to your point, you just can't see it, right? You don't know, and you don't know what all those pitfalls are. And the reality is that yes, we're super excited in the beginning, and yes, there's things happening, and it can seem very high pace inside the startup. But anybody looking at it from the outside, I mean, the things move glacially at the
Right.
beginning, right?
Right.
It's a series of these tiny little things. They're big lifts internally, right? Like getting the site live, figuring out our branding, hiring a couple of people, all that stuff. They're huge lifts on the inside, and maybe they go well. And so then we have this game we play where we extrapolate that out into the future, where all I have to do is copy paste, and it always works the same every time, ever after. And that's just not true. And again, this is where it gets dangerous, depending on the pace.
Well, let's talk about that. I want to stick with the car analogy. The analogy I
Okay,
would
we
use
like
here
cars.
is the analogy I would use here is imagine you're behind the wheel of your car and you're following the center line of the road. And at first, it feels like if you just hit the gas, you'll just get to your destination faster. But what you
Yes.
don't realize is that you're 5 degrees off the center line to the left. And
Yep.
all you're going to end up doing is running off the road much faster. But because
Yeah.
you stopped
You're
on
just
the
gonna end up
gas,
clearing somebody's forest for them. Yeah.
exactly, right? You don't have the sense for the fact that you're off course because all you're trying to
Right.
do is accelerate a broken assumption, which is that I'm on
Yep.
course. And I think this happens all the time to us because we don't give ourselves enough time to start to
Yeah.
say, "Hey, this thing's starting to veer off to the left. Like I don't I don't think we should
Yeah.
continue this course."
Time is an important part of this, but I want to circle back around to that because I think that deserves its own attention in today's episode. I think we really need to talk about like how time factors into this. And obviously, pace and time are inextricably linked. But let's talk about like why this acceleration, this early acceleration that you're talking about, really amplifies that mistake. And the analogy used is a perfect one, right? Because if you start off 5 degrees at the beginning, the longer you go or the faster you go, the further you end up from that midline faster, right? And all of a sudden you are miles away from where you intended to go. And we see it all the time where then founders end up in this place where they're like, this is not what I intended. This is not what I was trying to do.
Yep.
And then a couple of things happen. We have to do the classic, pivot, which is really just a nice way of saying, I made a wrong turn at Albuquerque, and now I got to loop back around, and this is going to take me lots of time and money. Or, worst case scenario, we see people just fold because of this. They're like,
Right.
we're so far off course, we don't have the money, the energy, the emotional fortitude to go back to that point where we got off course and go again. And that always makes me super sad because it's so often linked to this exacerbation of the error simply due to acceleration, right? That kills me because you
Right.
and I can both look at that in hindsight and go, man, if they'd gone a little slower, this probably wouldn't have happened. Or they would have course corrected way sooner.
I think what happens is initially we have our idea for our business, whatever it is. And let's just say that early on, our conversion rates look good. So we're sending people to our website or whatever your business is.
Yeah.
Our conversion rates look good, right? Okay, cool. We're spending some money in Google. We're sending some people to our landing page. Conversion rates look good. Cool.
Yep.
Like we proved that one, right?
Yep.
From there, the number of people that bought are buying at an average order value that's wonderful, right? It's exactly where we
Yep.
want to be. Also awesome, right? So we're
Right.
good on average order value. Next thing, they actually recur. They come back and buy, whether it's a subscription-based business or whether it's just them coming back and buying more.
Oh,
Awesome.
life is
We
beautiful.
proved
Yeah.
that, right? So we're good, right? No. Here's the thing. The assumption that we're missing is the factor of time. Will they
Yeah.
keep doing it? Let me tell
Right.
you
Is
this.
it repeatable?
Ryan, if someone's done it for 2 months, you haven't proven shit, right?
No.
Like,
No.
a year, 2 years is proving an assumption. Proving an assumption in the context of a month or two just means you got lucky. Now, the difference
Yeah.
between, luck and fortune and actual planning is a factor of time, right?
Yes.
You go to the
Yes.
casino and you bet, all your money and it works. You were lucky, right? But if you go back to the casino and you keep doing this for a period of 2 years, you're just good, right? I mean, there's a
Yeah,
point at
right.
which, you've got a repeatable process.
I only play the slots, so this doesn't really apply to
Yeah,
me.
no, you're screwed either way. But
Yep.
I think that when we consider that the folks that are looking at these assumptions don't understand the factor of time. They're
Yeah.
hitting the gas right away, right? And
Yep.
they're figuring out, okay, well, if it works this well now, it'll work 10x better with say 10x more money or 10x more resources. Not really. We got to take our
Right.
time. And that's one of the most rookie mistakes we make early on.
It sure is. And I think that part of that was built around this fail fast narrative. People misinterpreted what that meant,
Right.
right? That meant make your mistakes and make them quickly. It doesn't mean go fast so you can make mistakes, right? Because then you're forcing the function.
Right.
The idea isn't to make mistakes, right? It's
Right.
not that we want to fail. It's that we want to test the assumptions as early on as we can, but at an appropriate pace,
Right.
where we learn from those and we can move forward. We can make those adjustments, right? If there's going to be some binary point at which the business is a go or a no-go, good to get there sooner than later.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean go really fast so that you can bust through a whole bunch of mistakes. Because here's the reality. If you start to go too fast, you will just start to make mistakes. You will make mistakes you otherwise wouldn't have made because you're not giving yourself the time to understand the full context of what's going on, right? Things are moving past. Go back to the car analogy. They're flying past so fast. You can't even read the exit signs at this point. You don't know where you were supposed to turn. You don't know enough about what's happening to be able to correctly control and course correct. And
Right.
this is why, and again, like you said, like this is going to sound heretical, but like you got to pump the brakes a little bit and be okay with being slow. Yes, fail fast, meaning like get through the failures and then move on. But this doesn't mean go really fast so that you can fail, right? Nobody intended anybody to take that message away from it. And yet that's the interpretation that often gets fed back to me. Like, look, Ryan, we've just raised funds. We're going to dump a bunch of money into these campaigns. I was like, wait, the ones that we just talked about that you told me aren't performant? Yeah, we just need to fail fast here. You read that wrong. It's not what they meant.
I think the best deals you do are the ones you didn't do, right? The
Yeah,
the
it's
ones the
often the case,
I
man.
mean, we have such a long history, even at startups.com, of having so many opportunities presented to us in so many different ways. Could have
Yes.
been people we could have hired, could have been campaigns we could have done, companies we could have bought, industries or products we could have built or gone into. Uh,
Yeah.
and time again, the one thing we did really well and very consistently was we pumped the brakes. And we said, you
Yeah.
know what? Let's just give it a second, right?
Yeah.
Just because everybody's running toward that, let's just give it a second and make sure that that's actually where we want to head. And that has saved us so many,
Yeah.
so many bad decisions. And yet,
Yeah.
as founders, we don't do that very well. We don't pump the brakes very
No.
well to say, look,
No.
it's not that we don't want to be aggressive and go after deals. We just don't want to be running into the burning building only to find out it's collapsing as we step in, right?
Right.
It's really dangerous.
It is. It is. And to your point, I think, we've said no to so much more than we've said yes to.
Absolutely.
And it's not that we haven't said yes to a lot. I mean, when you look at what we've done, the number of acquisitions, the products we've built, the brands we've built, a lot has happened. But the number of things we said no to is exponentially higher than that. I mean,
Right.
had we said yes to everything, you'd walk into something that looked like a Costco,
Right.
It would be, we've got a lot already, but the
100
amount of
companies we know.
overwhelm that would exist had
Yeah.
we said yes to everything would be insane.
Right.
Said differently, we wouldn't have made it this far.
Right.
We would have become so fractionalized. We'd have become so confused. All of the analysis would have become so multivariate that we would have had no way of really understanding what was working and what isn't, right? And I think that's another, and it's not exactly the same thing as going fast, but it's an aspect of it,
Right.
And that's when you start to do too many things at the same time, because you can basically look at that as like, okay, if each of these things is only moving at 50 miles an hour, but we're doing 10 of them. Collectively, you're moving 500 miles an
Right,
hour.
right.
That becomes the same kind of problem. right? And because you don't have, again, because at this point in the episode, we're talking about time. We're talking about giving yourself the time to understand. When you start to throw too many things at the wall, you don't have the time to fully understand what the impact of those things was, how they interrelated. Did they improve things? Did they move things sideways, or did some of it fail? Are we obscuring failure? Are we obscuring success? Right? One of the other things that happens when you start to move too fast, and I've definitely talked about this recently, and I keep seeing this over and over again. I have probably talked in the last 2 months 100 founders around getting their marketing ship straightened out, right? Through our founders groups, I've had so many people reach out, done a ton of one-on-ones, and we keep coming back to this single narrative around the speed at which they're testing marketing channels and the speed at which they're letting them go, and they're getting false negatives. They're moving too fast in each channel, and then they're unable, because they're not giving themselves enough time to make the right decision about that channel. And they're moving on and moving on and moving on, and they're looking for the one that just happens to work like a flash fire right from the beginning. I can tell you that doesn't happen very often. I've been trying for a very long time to find it. Doesn't exist, right? They take time, they take cultivation, they take effort. And when you're moving 100 miles an hour and jumping from channel to channel to channel, it's like changing lanes really fast and assuming you're going to get somewhere sooner. It just doesn't really change anything, right? So I think, again, there's so many places this applies. This is the one that I'm seeing a lot right now, is that people just aren't giving themselves the time to fully see things through, and that's a huge danger. And again, exacerbated and made exponentially worse if you're doing this fast.
By the way, I just want to mention, if what we're talking about today sounds like the kind of discussion you wish you were having more often, you actually can. We're online all day, every day, working through exactly these types of topics with founders just like you. So any question you would have, or maybe some problem you just want to work through, we're here and we love this stuff. And we're easy to find. Head over to groups.startups.com and let's just start talking. Right. Look, early in my career, I've been at this for about 30 years.
Whoa!
Shut up. Early in my career, I thought the way it worked was I try to make good decisions and then I double down and I accelerate those decisions. And that's
Yep.
where I got screwed, because I kept thinking that as the CEO, as the leader, what have you, that my job was to make good decisions. What I didn't realize is I can't make good decisions. All I can do is make a series of bets and find out which ones become the good decisions.
Yes.
Big difference. Now I look at it very differently. I just make bets. And we talk about this all the time. No idea if they're going to work or not, right? We're going to try this. We're going to try this. We're going to try this. I know because statistically they're probably going to be wrong. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm bad at my job. It's because that's the nature of a bet. You don't know how it's going to turn out, right?
Right.
So what I need is just a little bit of time, to figure out if the bet that I made was a good bet. Now, if I ignore that, if I completely say, you know what, of course it's a good bet. I'm a genius.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Here's what's going to happen. Just like you said, I'm going to accelerate my failure. I'm going to make bets that are unproven, that I didn't give time to give me feedback to figure out if I should double down on them.
Yeah.
And all I'm going to do is just get to a failure point faster. By the way, with as few resources as I could possibly have.
That's the real issue. At that early stage, these things are you don't have the ability to place a lot of bets, right? Because you just got such limited resources. So being clear on the bets and making sure that you're following through on them, i.e. not racing from bet to bet to bet without kind of following through and making sure that you've done everything you can with each one of those bets, and understanding why they didn't work before you move on to the next one is so damn important, right? You're at a position in time where you're going to have the least resources, the least resiliency that your company is ever going to have. It's in its most fragile state, and yet we're going to treat it like a rocket ship, right? Not a great combination.
Yeah, I think one of the examples, though, is when we make a bet, it's actually the right bet. But for whatever reason, we architected it wrong. A good example is staffing,
Sure.
right? Let's say
Yep.
that you hire a salesperson to help, lead your new efforts for your enterprise sales, right? And that person, they go out there, they pitch everybody in the way you thought, with the product that you thought, and it doesn't work out. Now
Yeah. Yeah.
your assumption is that sales doesn't work for what I'm doing. I'm going to have to do online acquisition, etc. But what if, crazy thought, what if it was the wrong salesperson? So you replace
Yeah.
them with a new salesperson. And that salesperson comes in. They also suck. And you're like, look, man, I made this bet. I thought like direct sales was going to work. It didn't work. On to the next one. What if you missed on a few different things? What if you missed on the fact that the sales cycles were longer than you thought? They were year-long sales cycles, not month-long sales cycles. What if the person we hired, happens all the time, is just bad at it? A lot of these assumptions not only take time, they take multiple shots for us to get to, right? We need to say, look, I think sales is going to work, but here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to
Yeah.
hire up to 3 different salespeople, maybe sequentially because I don't have a lot of cash. And I'm going to test and I'm going to find out whether or not sales works. What I'm not going to do is hire one person one time and base my entire strategy based on how they work out. I'm going to give myself enough time to do a couple
Yep.
different variants of the bet to find out what works. People screw this up all the time
All the time.
because they assume that whatever the bet was that I made and the way that I made it and the resources that I had at the time is the only way to prove the bet. And the truth is,
Right.
for a lot of stuff, you just need the right combination to actually make that work, whether it's your
Yep.
product development, the people you're hiring, etc. And I think we overlook that all the time.
I mean, look, you get 3 strikes in baseball, arguably the slowest sport in the world, right? So if you get 3 strikes in baseball, the idea that you're going to get everything right in the first try in a startup is pretty ludicrous.
I think part of the challenge is we don't give ourselves enough time as founders in the company to let all our bets play out. What we do is we just started yesterday, right? And so Ryan, you and
Yep.
I are just trying to fire through this thing as fast as possible. Maybe we got accepted to an accelerator, an incubator, and they're saying we've got 3 months to make all the bets work. That's a
Right, right.
ridiculous compressed amount of time. You can't make anything
Yeah.
work in 3 months, right? You can build something, but that has nothing to do with making enough bets and seeing the maturation of your business model through,
Yeah.
which is why most of these things fail after 3 months. What we want to be able to do is say, look, I have to make lots and lots and lots of bets. Most of them will fail. But what I need is time. Time could be a year, could be 2 years. I need enough time to play some of these things out so that I've got enough history with the ones
Right.
that worked to know it's repeatable. And I
Right.
think
Yeah.
when we take time out, we screw ourselves.
We do. Because it's that repeatability that becomes so important, right? And I think that go back to when we talked about right at the very top of the episode, which is that, we're excited, we're enthusiastic, especially when we start to see some of our bets play out, right? Like there's certain
Right.
things that don't really require any luck or skill to have happen, right? Like getting your website. Okay, yeah, it takes some skill. Obviously, you got to have a developer. You got to know what you're doing. But like getting the website built isn't a bet, right? That's just
Right.
work that you do and then it's done. Figuring out what that first marketing channel is, figuring out who that first sales hire is, who that first product lead is.
Right.
Those are bets. Right. And when we see one of those play out, the excitement can get dialed up really quick. Right.
Yep.
Like, I am the best at this ever. I'm going to go do a whole bunch more of this.
Right.
And it's that repeatability piece that we get caught up in and get trapped in because it is just not the case. Right. It is not the case that simply because it worked once or it worked at a certain size, that it's going to continue to work forever and ever and ever.
Right.
If that was the case, then scale would be easy. You would simply have to figure out what worked and then just always do more of that, right? Almost everything in your startup is going to have at least plateaus, if not hard ceilings, right? Where tactics or strategy is going to have to change when you get to a certain point, right? And if you're moving too fast, you'll miss that. Right? We've done this. I've done this. I've run right past an acceptable cost per lead because the cost per lead was working really well, keep adding gas to the fire, keep adding
Right.
gas to the fire, keep adding gas to the fire. And then all of a sudden, that cost and the cost per lead, the spend and the cost per lead start to split apart.
Right.
If you're accelerating that spend too fast, you won't notice it soon enough to save yourself the money that you've now wasted simply by buying more and more and more expensive leads, right? And this is just one example of thousands where by not giving ourselves that time and assuming that what works at a certain level will just continue to scale off into the future, really bites us hard, right? And so, you've got to give yourself the time. You've got to keep revisiting these things and not just assume that they will automatically be rinse and repeatable. Marketing is one of the places we see this happen. Hiring is certainly one of the places where we see this happening. Because we had one developer and we can move at this pace. So we had 2 developers and now we're moving twice as fast. So if we had a 3rd developer, we'll move 3 times as fast. Except we forgot about the part where the inefficiency starts to get introduced because of the size of the team. Right now, that's not a hard stop, but it's a change in the curve. Right, and we have to be moving at a speed where we can see these changes in the curve and we can react to them. Otherwise, we end up digging ourselves into really big and hard to climb out of holes.
I agree. And what we don't realize is that all the time that we end up wasting is a lot of money.
Oh,
right?
man.
Because we're ripping through cash, often our own,
Yeah. Yep.
during that time, right?
Right.
And it's okay if we happen to make the right bet and the money's going to an accretive source, but we usually don't, right?
We don't.
So
Right.
all we end up doing is ripping through more cash on these broken assumptions. I see
Yes.
this all the time with startups that are getting their early stage funding. They're like, I need a ton of money in order to increase marketing based on
Right.
our MVP. And I'm like, dude, it takes like 2 to 3 years to get
Yeah.
your MVP right? Like
Yep.
nobody goes in out of the gates with exactly what product they're supposed to build. It just doesn't
Right.
work that way, right?
No. We're
We
not
go
making
in
hamburgers.
right with a concept of where we should be, also by the way, usually wrong. And we need some time, right? To get a whole
Yep.
bunch of data so that we can start to shape it, to get the pricing right, to get the marketing strategy right, to get the team right, right?
Yeah.
All of these things just take a little bit of time for us to figure out. The worst
Yep.
thing we can do, and I think this is the crux of it, the worst thing we can do is 3 months into our idea, load up on capital, give up a bunch of equity so that we can accelerate all of our bad bets. And the
Right.
worst part is we don't know they're bad
Man.
bets yet.
We
They
don't.
are. We're telling
It's
you
so
now they're
painful.
bad bets.
Oh, man. I mean, how many of these postmortems have we read? Right? Like, it's often a huge part of that narrative, right? Which is that we accelerated a time where we thought we knew what we were doing, and it turns out that we didn't, right? And we
Right.
accelerated
Right.
right off the cliff.
Right.
And that's one scenario. The other scenario is even without capital, right? You talked about time being money. Like we're burning cash, regardless of the source. Burning cash hurts, but there's another side to that. When we continue to double down and accelerate on the wrong bets, there's also the opportunity cost of the fact that we haven't gotten to the right bet yet.
Right.
And that
Right.
hurts just as much and sometimes more. If
Right.
you're working with, and this is probably more for the funded startups than the unfunded, it depends on how, what your runway looks like. But let's assume you're working with a finite runway. Let's assume you've got a burn rate that will eventually outstrip your ability to maintain it, and you've got a hard stop at some point, right? Or you got to raise more cash, or something else has to change. You got to make big bad decisions like cutting most of the team or whatever.
Right.
We've gone through these disaster scenarios in other episodes. You can go check those out. But in the time in which you've got this finite point in the future and you're burning that cash, you're accelerating towards that point, and you're also not making the bets that will ultimately be the correct ones because you're doubling down and accelerating on the wrong ones, you're essentially signing your death warrant at that point, right?
Right.
So the opportunity cost cannot be forgotten either, right? There's the actual cash cost, which sometimes, is the most severe consequence you pay. But often the opportunity cost of not getting it right in time means that you're not around long enough to figure that out, right? You're
Right.
gone before you got to the bet that was going to be the one that led you to the promised land. And man, that breaks my heart.
We're talking a lot about uh, accelerating marketing, accelerating product, but we
Yep.
didn't talk too much about the cost of accelerating the wrong people, right?
Yes.
The
Yep.
the assumption here is that the people that happen to come together in this merry band of misfits are
Yep.
the right people to accelerate.
Right.
And
Right.
step back for a second, right? And it's like, okay, our quote CFO is the only person that took an accounting course in college, right? Our developer has never shipped a mobile app before in their life, right? Our marketing team has never scaled anything beyond like $1,000 a month Google AdWords spend. Let's
Yep.
go all in on this team,
Yep.
right?
Let's go.
Like,
Right.
again, but we don't know any better because this is the only team we've ever built. It's the only team
Yep.
that was willing to work with us. So I
Right.
guess that works. What we need is enough time to see if the team we have sitting around actually scales. You'll find out quickly, trust me. The moment you,
Yeah.
you you try to push a bit. But if we go on this assumption that whatever team I happen to have must be good enough for what I'm trying to do, I guarantee that's wrong.
The core point here is that speed and growth and scale, they're all good things, right? At the right time, right? When it's responsible to do so. But you've got to take it in a measured way such that the acceleration doesn't become the thing that kills you instead of grows you, right? We all want our startups to grow. We all want to be as big as we can. We all want to make that dent in the universe that we set out to make. We want to make it as big as we can, and we want to get there as fast as we can, right? The fast as we can is the important part here because there's a lot of startups, and I'm not going to name any, but there's an entire graveyard out there filled with startups who accelerated off the edge of a curve that they didn't see coming and couldn't survive the pivot, couldn't pull the resources together to bring it back together, right? So, as you think about growing your business, take a beat. Give yourself a minute, give yourself permission to take it a little slower and to make sure that you've got the clarity and the time to understand that the bets you're making are paying back or not, when it's time to change the direction, when it's time to finally step on that gas, right? It's not always crystal clear. But what's crystal clear to me is that far too many people are trying to accelerate far too soon simply because that's the narrative that's been set. Don't follow the narrative, follow the circumstances, the consequences, and the actual context of your startup company and move at the pace that it's meant to move and that you're meant to lead it at.
All right, so that was fun, but let's actually keep this conversation going. You've heard what we think about this, but Ryan and I would really like to hear what you think. And we're online like all day long, pretty much talking about every startup topic you could think of, from fundraising to customer acquisition to just really how to get all of this crazy startup stuff out of your head. And there's tons of other founders just like you. They're weighing in on these topics, so you'll get a chance to just hang out and meet some really smart founders. We're also super, super easy to find. You head over to groups.startups.com and let Ryan and I hear what's on your mind. Let's get to know each other a little bit, and let's just start having more of these conversations.